Don't Jump, which was originally titled Why is Julia Roberts Living My Life, is a fictionalized memoir, and I swear to some of it. And I've decided that's what I'm sticking with, and no more with this novel shit, because it's not. And I finished it, and I did, and I turned it in again. Okay, so anyway, here we are. Andy is, she's a 35-year-old ex-rock and roll promoter, and she's married to her best friend Lenny, who was a stand-up teacher, and he's a comedian, but now he's on retainer writing jokes for Rob Halloran, who is their hero. He is the irreverent hipster variety TV shows host. Marty, the chilly, semi-condescending head writer, hired Lenny to write jokes, but seems to hold him in a certain disdain. Chris Nicosia is a comic who they've known since his $10 a set days, is now a sitcom star. Cookie is her mother, and this is the 90s. Okay. Being a stay-at-home wife and mother suited me. Completely satisfied with our little family, at 40, I figured 3 was what we were going to be. And I was just fine with that. At a girlfriend's bachelorette party, a psychic suggested otherwise. I see another child. Really? A boy or a girl? I don't want to say. Just in case. Just in case what? She knew I had Jack. She'd already guessed that, so I deduced. She must see a girl in my future. Why else would she not want to say? When I got pregnant the first time, I knew it was a boy, and I was thrilled. When I lost that baby, all I wanted was that boy. Jack far exceeded my dream. Okay, I lost my place. Okay, I hadn't really fantasized about having a girl since I was one. But once the psychic planted the seed of possibility, it was all I could think about. Even though Lenny thought it was nonsense, including her prediction about a writing project I'd undertake, I got pregnant the next month. When we found out I was carrying a girl, I signed up for a screenwriting class. Just past the first trimester nausea, while spending a few days with Cookie at the beach, Lenny got the call. Listening intently, he put his hand over the mouthpiece and whispered, "It's Marty. He's leaving the show." "What does that mean? Are you still in?" Lenny shrugged, still listening. I gave him a nudge. Lenny mouthed, "He's recommending me as his replacement." Holy shit! Marty had decided to leave Holler an Hour to write the great American novel. He'd had the job for years. We never imagined this could happen, let alone so soon. Lenny had been on retainer for less than a year. The same day that he got the call from Marty, he landed his first on-camera national commercial playing Rain Man. It required him to dye his blonde hair black. Lenny left everything in the colorist's hands. It never dawned on him to ask, "Would you use a temporary dye, please?" At his interview with Halloran 3 days later, nervous as a 5-year-old on the first day of kindergarten, he couldn't help but notice Rob staring at him. There was pale, white-skinned Lenny with bright blue eyes and jet black hair. He looked like Hitler. After the interview, Marty called. "Rob's got a couple more people to see, but he liked you. I think you're in. He did say you look kind of weird." Rob's a creature of habit. He surrounds himself with people he trusts, and maybe even more importantly, feels comfortable with. That's a very small group. He doesn't like change, dresses almost in uniform, eats the same menu daily, and only interacts with a very select, hand-picked few. His staff are, for the most part, lifers, until someone dares leave or somehow loses favor. The cast of his inner entourage had barely shifted in the previous decade. Everyone was anxious about Marty leaving and Lenny stepping in. After 2 weeks on the job, Rob called Lenny into his office. "Have a seat." Lenny nervously obliged. After a long pause, Rob said, "So, how do you think things are going so far?" In his mind, Lenny felt he was in a no-win situation. If he said things were going well, he'd look like an arrogant asshole. If he played it down and implied that things were rough, he'd look like a loser. So Lenny hedged his bet. I think things are going okay. You know, like I see areas where I can improve, but I think overall it's going pretty well." Rob interjected, halting Lenny's rambling. "Well, I think it's going much better than I expected. You're doing a great job, Lenny. If I have any criticism, there's just one piece of advice I'd offer. Relax a little." After exhaling in relief, Lenny gave that his best shot. Slowly, they started to get comfortable with each other, which wasn't easy for either of them. Lenny spent the mornings writing material and sorting through hundreds of jokes submitted by the rest of the staff. He compiled a daily best of and dropped them off to Rob mid-morning. Once Rob checked his picks, Lenny had them put on cue cards. They had rehearsal at precisely the same time each afternoon, just Rob, Lenny, and Sal, the cue card guy. It was a position of much stature, as only the three of them were allowed in that room. It was where Rob was most himself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It could be an extremely stressful place on the days when Rob was contrary to everything, but it was also sacred ground where very personal secrets were openly shared with a famous man that nobody knew. Len was honored to be on the team. Unlike Marty, who was always on, Lenny was low-key, picking his moments to tickle Rob when he found an in. He'd slip in a joke or infuse some dialects and characterizations, which he did about as good as anyone. He'd sneak in a magic trick and recount stories of life on the road, a past they both shared in its heyday, although their timing was off and they never crossed paths. Rob was a few years ahead of Lenny, but they knew a lot of the same people, and Holleran loved hearing their tales. He'd been so removed from the scene due to his celebrity and his self-imposed isolation. As the months wore on, Lenny got to go to a few dinners with Rob and a very small group of hand-picked funny men. Considering that Rob himself did these dinners only a couple of times a year, it was a big deal to be included. When Sydney was born about 6 months later, we scheduled her arrival so that Lenny wouldn't miss a rehearsal. He knew Rob wouldn't welcome an upset to his daily routine and worried about anyone else getting in. I was willing to be induced to lessen both their stress and to avoid another 36-hour labor. At the last minute, the taping changed. We'd gone to great extremes to avoid this very thing. Rob had Pat, a senior staff writer, and an old friend from college fill in, assuring Lenny it wasn't a problem. But Lenny feared doom. Magnificent pink roses were delivered after Sid's birth, with a fun, thoughtful note from Rob. I was euphoric to begin with. Rob's attention heightened the deal considerably. In spite of the effort, Lenny's fears were realized. Once Pat was added to the mix, he never left. And now that Rob and Lenny had a buffer, neither of them had to try as hard with each other. So they didn't. Holleran had a daily ritual of banging on the closet door when he entered rehearsal. The guys occasionally tried to surprise him by stashing a guest in there. When Sydney was about 3 months old, waiting for the last possible second, we put her in there, bassinet and all, praying that she wouldn't cry, and I hid in the bathroom. As Holleran approached to rap on the door, he stopped himself before anyone else had the chance. He'd obviously been tipped off, but it didn't matter. His genuine delight as he tentatively opened the door and beheld our tiny baby girl was clear. He softened like warm butter. Lifting her up in the air, he cooed, "Hello, Sydney. Hello, baby girl." It was a bonding moment for Lenny and Rob. Rob continued to ask about sweet Sydney until Marty resurfaced, after which he never spoke of her again. At one time, Marty was a young comic on the rise, giving it up for the honored position of being Rob's conduit to the funny. It was a powerful post, one he took very seriously and complained about constantly. After a number of years, more than a few gray hairs, he happily passed it on to Len to pursue his dream as a writer of fiction. When the transition went off without a hitch, he began stopping by. And whenever he did, Rob distanced himself from Lenny. I truly believe it was Rob's sensitivity to Marty's fragile ego and his desire to have his old pal around more than it was a diss to Lenny. Marty was a trusted friend with whom Rob was completely comfortable. He could probably count on one hand the people he felt that way about. It was understandable that he appreciated the few who dared and managed to get close to him. Even though Marty didn't want the job anymore, he didn't want anyone else to have it either. He began to visit the office more and more regularly. After some months, he was around a lot. And before Len knew what hit him, maybe a year later, Marty was back on the payroll. According to the buzz, it was merely to entertain Rob, who missed him. He got paid the big bucks to come to the office a couple of hours a day for rehearsal. And once he did, Lenny was permanently excused from the task, and his private time with Rob was drastically diminished. When the gig was all Lenny's, we were at an all-time high. Madly in love, the kids were thriving, and we had money to stop worrying about, enough money to stop worrying about it. We were living the life of Riley. We were blessed, and we knew it. Once Marty came back, the stress started taking its toll. First, Lenny was out of rehearsals, and then the dinners. He couldn't help but wonder if Marty would push him out completely. After a few years, we got kind of comfortable in our uncertainty. There was still a lot of off-camera conversation with Rob during commercial breaks when Marty had gone home, but they were getting less enthusiastic, and as time went on, chilly. Eventually, it was nothing but frost. That's when our world started to dim. It was a crazy life, but with the constant stress came perks beyond our imagination. About 11 months after Lenny started at Holler an Hour, he found out he'd been nominated for an Emmy. It might as well have been an Oscar or the Nobel Prize. At the Holler and Emmy party, we ran into Chris and Maria. Chris was now a full-fledged TV star. Lenny was one of the only people in the room he knew from his salad days. We spent most of the evening in cozy conversation with him and his wife, Maria. The following year at the same event, an even bigger celebrity now, Chris seemed even friendlier. He was playful and complimentary. I'd finally lost the pregnancy pounds, taken Pilates, and was now in the best shape I'd been in years. Wearing a slinky snake print, low-cut, figure-hugging two-piece ensemble, both Rob and Chris were vocal in their appreciation. It was food for the soul for this then 43-year-old wife and mother. Some years later, we ran into Chris and Maria at a Christmas party thrown by Chris's television wife. A star-studded affair in a movie star environment. It was a huge home with an enormous amount of property in Hancock Park, just this side of Beverly Hills. On the corner of the grounds was set up a children's paradise complete with rides and clowns. There were tables and chairs around the pool with strolling waiters offering drinks and hors d'oeuvres. The celebrities there with their own families were amiable and accessible. Jack and Sydney were jazzed, meeting actors they'd seen on the small screen. Bless you. While chatting with an old friend from New York, a little commotion caught my eye. There was a buzz around the back door. Chris and his entourage had arrived. It was early evening on a cloudy day, and yet there was Chris, Maria, and their children, all wearing dark glasses. Chris was by this time a bona fide superstar, earning more money than anyone in the history of television. But still, they just looked silly. And for the first time, they acted the part, aloof and unapproachable. When in the past we discussed schools and the cruelty of aging, that day it was clear he didn't wish to be bothered. After quick introductions to the kids, we slinked away. I suppose there's no way to achieve that level of success and remain unchanged. Who's to say that in that situation anyone would have behaved any differently? What about Julia? She seems to have remained grounded and lovely. Tom Hanks, someone else I admire tremendously, strikes me as so everyman. Despite his Oscars, his fame, his wealth, he appears to be the same as I expect he was before celebrity rocked his world. Of course, that's purely conjecture. I admire Chris plenty. He's hardworking, incredibly creative, innovative, talented, and funny, funny, funny. Maybe he and Maria had a fight in the car on the way over, like the rest of us mortals. Maybe they needed the sunglasses to cover their tears. Or maybe I'm just a jealous twat.